Hello, today we are going to be talking about ratios. This is lesson 5.1 in your book, if you want to follow along. Our learning target for the day is to learn how to write ratios and how to use ratios to compare quantities. The biggest thing that we're going to do here today is talk about what a ratio is and talk about the 3 different ways on how we solve them. All right, sorry about that. So the definition of ratio is a comparison of 2 numbers by division. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw some pictures of some apples and some oranges. And these ones here on the left are my apples, and these ones over here are my oranges. It's kind of hard to tell on this, and I'm trying to use the notes from class today, so it's also going a little bit fast. I'm trying to pause it, and there might be some bumps in this one. So when we are comparing 2 different numbers, and I'll explain what it means by division in a minute, it means that we can now use a fraction to compare 2 different types of things. I can now compare apples to oranges. I can now compare boys to girls, boys to all the kids in the class, girls to all the kids in the class. There's lots of things and lots of scenarios that we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks. But what you need to know before we start any of this is that there are 3 different ways to write a ratio. The first one, if I'm comparing apples to oranges here, I have 5 apples and I have 7 oranges. The first way that I can write that is I can actually write 5 to 7, the word 2. Another way that I can write that is 5 colon 7, and then the last way that I can write that is a fraction, 5 over 7. So you'll have to remember these. This time I'm comparing apples to oranges, so it is important that I remember that it's 5 to 7 because it's apples to oranges. If I was comparing oranges to apples, it would be the other way around, so be mindful of that. The next definition that you need to know is equivalent ratios. The definition of equivalent ratios, and I'll speed that up just a little bit and then you can write it down, is 2 ratios that name the same number. And we've talked about equivalent and what equivalent means, and we know that it means equivalent, or I'm sorry, that equivalent means the same or equal. Okay, and the way that you find equivalent ratios is by writing a ratio as a fraction. So this third way that we talked about, 5 apples to 7 oranges, if we wanted to write an equivalent ratio for that, we would use the fraction form. So in this case down here, you'll see I wrote 4 over 5. If I was comparing 4 boys to 5 girls, and I wanted to write an equivalent ratio for that, then I would simply multiply both sides. Whoops, not sure what happened there. By 2. So if I multiply the bottom by 2, and what we already know about fractions, if you multiply the bottom, you must multiply the top, then I can get an equivalent ratio of 8 over 10. Now you can multiply the top and bottom by any amount that you want. You can multiply it by 100, by 1,000, by 921. As long as you do the same to the top and the bottom, it doesn't matter. For the sake of our homework and all of our assignments, I'm asking that you always multiply by 2 when looking for an equivalent ratio, just so we can stay on the same track. It's just important that you understand that you have those other options. But for the sake of making correcting easy, we are going to do multiplying by 2 to find equivalent fractions. Okay, so the first little example I gave here is write the ratio 2 yards to 20 feet as a fraction in simplest form. I've written down the steps for you so you know how to do these when you're solving these problems for your homework. Red is a fraction, so I'm comparing yards to feet, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of conversion here. I'm going to make yards my numerator and feet my denominator. For the sake of reducing, I'm going to want to convert this. I know that there are 3 feet in 1 yard. So I'm going to multiply this by 3. Oops. That is just not looking good. Let me try that again. I'm going to multiply this by 3. Now I know that there are 3 feet in 1 yard, so 2 times 3 feet per yard would give me 6 feet. And then I'm just going to bring this over here, and it will be 20 feet. The reason I'm not multiplying the bottom by 3 like I did the top is because all I'm doing here is converting yards to feet. Now if I were to change anything, I would have to multiply the top and the bottom. But I'm just getting these, so I'm not comparing apples and oranges anymore. I'm comparing apples and apples, if that makes sense. Now, the directions say to write this in simplest form. 6 to 20 feet is not in simplest form because I can divide each of these by 2. So if I divide the top by 2, then I'm going to get 3 feet. And if I divide the bottom by 2, I'm going to get 10 feet. So in simplest form, then I would be comparing this ratio as 3 to 10 feet. If I kept it as yards to feet, I would be 1 yard to 10 feet. 1 yard is 3 feet. So you'll see that this is the exact same answer. So you can do that either way, by converting or not converting. Another way to solve these types of problems is to use decimals. I underlined this important little memo for you guys. It says you can use decimals to compare, this is supposed to say ratios, to compare ratios and to see if they are equivalent. And remember that equivalent means same. So for example, a US flag has a length to width ratio. It's not supposed to say ration, it's supposed to be ratio, of 19 to 10. The largest U.S. flag measures 505 feet by 255 feet. Is this an official U.S. flag? So I know that the official flag is 19 to 10. I'm going to write that as a fraction, 19 to 10. For this unit, you will be able to use calculators, which I told you in class today. So what I would do on my calculators, I would actually punch in 19, then I would do divided by 10, and I would get an answer of 1.9. This is also called a unit rate, which we'll talk about next lesson. So the largest U.S. flag was 505 compared to 255. I'm going to punch this into my calculator, 505 divided by 255. I get an answer of 1.98. So the question is this an official U.S. flag? The answer would be no. This one is my official. This one is a little bit bigger, so we know that the largest U.S. flag is not truly an official flag. Okay, I will do a couple of examples with you. The first one here says write the ratio of boys to girls in our class 3 different ways. So you're obviously probably watching this at home and we can't actually count. But let's say in class today that we had 11 boys and 13 girls. If we were to do this, 11 boys to girls, I'm comparing boys to girls. So I'm going to keep the boys the first comparison and the girls the second comparison. So one way that I could write that is 11 to 13. 11 compared to 13 and 11 over 13. It's that simple. Those are the 3 different ways that I can write that ratio. The second question says write the ratio of boys to all students. So I just told you that there are 11 boys and we know that there's 13 girls, so that means we have a total of 24 kids. And I'm comparing boys to all students. 11 to 24, 11 to 24, 11 over 24. Those are the 3 different ways that I can write a ratio. The reason it's important to know that is because sometimes you will see a ratio written in a different way and you will have to convert it. The next question says, find the ratio equivalent of 7 ninths. Remember, I'm asking when you find equivalents, sorry, that's the bell, that we multiply by 2, and we use 2 just as our base number so it's easy to correct. Multiply the top and the bottom by 2, and I end up with 14/18. This is an equivalent, not simplest form. So equivalent I can go higher, but simplest form I always go lower. Okay, the next example here says write the ratio 3 gallons to 10 quarts. Remember that there are 4 quarts in 1 gallon, so I'm going to have to convert this. I'm going to write it as 3 gallons to 10 quarts. But right now I'm comparing apples to oranges, or gallons to quarts. So I'm going to convert this, so I have to multiply this by 4. I'm not multiplying the bottom by 4 because all I'm doing here is conversion. So I end up with 12 quarts compared to 10 quarts, and here I'm able to reduce. These are both even numbers, which means they're both divisible by 2. So I end up with 6 quarts compared to 5 quarts. Now, there are a couple more examples here, but I am going to stop this lesson. I'm sorry about the interruption with the bell, but I want to get this one posted. We went over these last 2 in class, and as you can tell, Doceri didn't get up the fractions for me, so I don't have them in front of me. So hopefully you can finish up by doing a sum it up, and that can help you remember what you need to know. You remember that there's 3 different ways to write a ratio. That is very important to remember, and you're going to see that throughout this entire chapter. And then we also talked about equivalent fractions, and we talked about putting, equivalent ratios. And then along with that, we also talked about putting ratios in simplest form. And then I think I will walk through this pancake question up here just because this one's pretty important and you might need this to be able to complete your homework. The question says to make pancakes you need 2 cups of water for every 3 cups of flour. So I'm comparing cups of water to cups of flour. So 2 cups of water compared to 3 cups of flour. Write an equivalent ratio, that's a word that we learned, to find how much water you'll need for 9 cups of flour. So remember, this is water and this is flour. What it's asking me to do is to write an equivalent ratio. So I'm going to keep flour on the bottom and water on the top. Always remember that throughout this entire chapter when we're working with ratios, if we're comparing to apples to oranges, you just have to be consistent. So that means flour is going to stay my denominator. So if I'm going to write an equivalent ratio to find what I need for 9 cups of flour, ooh, that is not very good penmanship. Sorry about that. How did I get from 3 to 9? I multiply by 3. If I have equivalent ratios, whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So 2 multiplied by 3 is 6. So how much water do I need if I were making pancakes with 9 cups of flour? I would need 6 cups of water. And then this example here, find the equivalent ratio of 4 to 5. I'm just going to rewrite that as a fraction, which is one of the 3 ways of writing a ratio. And for the sake of staying consistent, I've asked you guys to use 2 when finding equivalent ratios. So your answer for this would be 8/10. Okay, hopefully that helps, and we will tackle the next part of ratios tomorrow.